During the American Revolution, many women took to the road, joined their husbands with the army. They were called camp followers. They walked carrying whatever possessions they had on their backs, frequently carrying or leading their children. They came from a variety of backgrounds, so appearance and possessions vary. General George Washington believed that women should not be allowed to follow the army. However, Washington realizes the dynamics of his army and those women can provide a vital role to their survival. Wives were entitled to half rations. Children got quarter rations. Can you imagine? During a recent tour of Valley Forge in August 2023, a park ranger named Beth assumed the role of reenactor to tell us about what life was like for these women.
When I first started, I was told, hey, when you're up here, you're in period clothing and you do this program called Soldier Life. And I'm like, but I'm going to dress like a lady instead of like a guy. Can I talk about the girls instead? They said, sure. So you guys are getting the girl talk. And I think it's important because when you think Revolutionary War or American Revolution, you do tend to think of the guys, right? And you hardly ever hear about the women that were involved. So I think it's important to make sure everyone knows that they were here. They had various roles to play and various reasons for being here. So the first group is our camp followers. And when I say camp followers, a lot of people get some preconceived ideas of what that means. So the ones I'm talking about are the ones that are within camp boundaries. And to talk about the women that were here within camp boundaries, I need to talk about the men just a little bit to understand why the women were here. So imagine you guys are a very poor family, right? Struggling to make ends meet. You're renting the little corner of someone else's farmyard, and you're struggling to pay that rent. And you hear, husband enlists, he gets a signing bonus, some money up front. Sounds like a good deal, right? If a little money would help you out. You also hear, if he serves out his term of duty, that you get a land, right? So now you don't have to rent someone else's farmyard. You get to own your own property, and you have all the rights that go along with it. So husband enlists trying to make a better life for the family. Meanwhile, family that was struggling already is now struggling even more without an extra adult in the household and can't afford rent. And so these women end up homeless because they can't pay the bills. It's not a honey, I miss you and I want to hang out with you. It's a we have nowhere else to go, dear, so we're coming with type of situation. Now imagine, you don't have a whole lot because you're a poor family, right? And you're packing up your house and you need to go through and decide what you need to take with to survive following an army. So what may be some of the things you guys would bring with? Pots and pans. Now have you ever carried a pot or a pan from the 1700s? It's heavy. It's cast iron, so it's heavy. Yeah. And anything else? What else would you guys be bringing with?
Hatchet.
A blanket, hatchet. Did I get that right?
Yep.
Okay. Hatchet. Yeah. You may need a hatchet to chop firewood, so then you can start a fire to cook over, maybe to keep you warm. So that could be something handy. Hatchet, not terribly light, not terribly heavy, but there's some weight to it. Blankets. Yeah. You're going to want a bedroll or something to sleep on, but kind of looking at it from a different perspective. You're there possibly in winter, right? They were here in wintertime. What I wear in winter is a wool cloak. It's heavy. It fits me. If I bring a blanket, now me and the kids could get underneath that, right? So it serves double duty. So you start weighing those options. Do I bring the heavy wool cloak? Do I bring the heavy wool blanket that maybe a couple of people can get underneath? So you start kind of going back and forth with some of that stuff. Anything else you guys can think of? Clothes? Yeah, and you may not have a lot. We have a lot of clothes these days, usually a closet full and a dresser full. And back then you may just have a couple of outfits and you're only bringing a few with and you may wear through them, right? So you want to have a sewing kit to kind of mend them and do that type of stuff. If you have kids, they're coming along. Now, if you have a couple different sized kids, you may try to bring the biggest clothes you can, knowing that you can hem things and whatnot, and they can grow into them, and you can make it work for everyone. There are stories of women giving birth while following this army. So there could be newborns with, and these ladies, they're taking all that stuff that we just mentioned, plus probably a few more items, and they're either carrying it on their back or in a wagon, like a wheelbarrow type of thing, right? So they're physically moving that stuff, and a lot of it is heavy. And if you have a newborn, if you have a 2 or 3 year old, they are not marching 20 miles behind the army every day, right? So you're carrying them too. So these women were tough. This was not an easy easy go for them. Washington called them a clog on every movement, wanted to kick them out because, it's an army. We're struggling to take care of the guys. Why do we want to take care of all these families too, right? When the army marched through a town, he marched the women and children around the town, so the townspeople didn't have to look at the disheveled women and, kind of know the dirty little secret type of deal. But Washington knew if he kicked out all these ladies, what's going to happen to some of your soldiers? They're going to take off, right? So what he did is he kicked out all the working ladies, which is what a lot of people assume camp followers are. So here you were family. You were the wife, the daughter, the sister of a soldier. Your family. And I know you haven't checked out the huts yet, but they're 14 by 16, so not terribly large. And you'd have 12 soldiers in there, plus potentially a family. So it was cozy. And Washington's like, okay, we're struggling to feed the troops. We're giving these women a little bit of ration, but we need to give them some opportunities to hopefully get them back on their feet and have them be less dependent on the army. So he's like, how would you ladies like to do the laundry? He was super excited. It was a way to make money. They got to charge their own rates, although occasionally some of the generals were like, hey, your rate is too high, you need to bring it down, otherwise I'm kicking you out of camp. So they're kind of walking this fine line of like trying to make enough to subsidize their food and maybe get back on their feet without ticking off the commanding officer and risk having the little bit that they have. But they did it. Again, opportunity. And then you have, later on, Washington realized that women can do more than wash clothes. And I'm sure all of us ladies are like, yes, we can. And so he's like, how would you guys like to do the nursing? Here at Valley Forge, you had about 2,000 men die of disease. They're dying of infectious diseases like typhus and typhoid and dysentery and flu and all sorts of stuff that they're not really sure how it's spreading. And so when folks got sick, they got sent out to area hospitals, and then you have the nursing kind of being done out there. When they died, it would be out in those area hospitals. So these women were heading out towards those areas. And, just like, imagine taking care of a sick child, right? They're sneezing in your face, they're coughing in your face. You might be changing bedpans or chamber pots. You might even be hauling out a body, right? And you don't know to wash your hands between patients. You don't know to wear a face mask. All the things that we take for granted, especially after the last few years, they don't know about. So these women stood a very real risk of getting sick and dying themselves. So it was considered dangerous work, and they were rightfully reluctant to do it, but they did. They got a paycheck from the army, and they got a larger ration of food. So it was a way, again, to get back on their feet. There are some reports that by the end of the war, some of the women doing the nursing were getting paid better than some of the soldiers. So it was important, and like I said, the women did do it because it was an opportunity. I call my next group kind of the accidental soldiers. These women are here. They're following the army wherever they go. They're here in camp. They're walking between the locations as they're going across the country. They're there for the training. They're there for the battles. And sometimes something happens and they end up fighting. Molly Pitcher is the most famous example of this, and there's a little debate over, everything attributed to Molly Pitcher. Is that really one person? Is it kind of a conglomerate of women and different stories together? But basically, her story goes something like this, where she was a camp follower, and her husband was on their artillery crew, and she's been following for a while, so she sees the training and knows how he does his thing because she's been there. And there's a battle, and he gets shot down in battle. I think if my husband got shot down, I'd be like, okay, we're gonna patch you up, we're taking you home, we're getting out of here, we're done with this war thing, we're gonna make it okay and then leave. And she's like, no, I know all these guys, I know how to do this job. I had someone say the other day she was probably also ticked. And so she stepped in and helped fire that cannon. So she participated in the war. There are other stories of women picking up muskets and doing the same. So they weren't planning on waking up in the morning and be like, I'm going to get me some British, but it happened. So they were part of that. And you had other women who straight up enlisted and fought, which was illegal. So to do that, they had to dress like a man, take a man's name, pretend to be a man 24/7, right? They are cutting down the trees and dragging them across the landscape to build the huts. They're chopping the firewood. They're digging the trenches and building the forts. They're using the open latrine, which is a ditch in the ground, to go to the bathroom. all while fooling everyone 24/7, right? They're sleeping this far away from other guys because remember, 12 men and possibly a family in that hut. So there's no bathroom door that they can just close and be like, okay, girl, and just kind of decompress for a minute. They're on all the time. The most famous woman that we know her story is Deborah Sampson. And we only know her story because after the war, she went on a speaking tour, and because she needed some money. So if she had stayed quiet, we would never have known about her. So how many other women stayed quiet or got lucky? So Deborah, she was, things were going good. She was, in the war, she was kind of moving up in the ranks. Life was okay. And then she got injured. Went to the doc, and the doc's like, oh, not a boy, right? and he kind of agreed that she was a good soldier and was going to stay quiet and not let the cat out of the bag. So she was able to finish out her tour of duty. And again, if she just kind of continued on and didn't need extra money, we would never have known her story because everyone stayed quiet. So how many other women were good soldiers, never got injured, never had an opportunity to kind of get called out that could have been fighting? And then we have this last group who might have been in camp, might have been kind of all over the area, but they're my spies. Now, if you're a good spy, does anyone know you're a spy?
No.
Right, yeah. So again, this is another group where finding those stories are a little bit difficult. We hear bits and pieces here and there. Sometimes they're under code names, like they're given numbers and whatnot as opposed to a person's name. But you think about it, women can make awesome spies. We have ways to get information out of guys. Right? So some of it's kind of pretty simple. It could be walking into camp and being like, hey, how's it going? Bat the eyelashes a little bit. And they start talking. It could be you're working in a tavern or an inn and you're serving the boys alcohol. They're not thinking you're paying any attention to what they're talking about, but they're jabbering away, spilling the beans. It could be something as simple as sitting here underneath the tree and you're watching the troop movements out there and you're counting how many cannons are going by and how many troops they have and reporting that to whoever you think are the good guys. There was a woman in Philadelphia whose house was taken over by the British and they started planning an attack on Washington, and she was able to relay the information out to Washington's troops, so they had a heads up that it was coming. There was another woman, and I like this story, where she was delivering a letter and knew that there was a pretty good risk she was going to get caught by the British, and so she read the letter and memorized it. And she's riding along, and here come the British, and she's like, oh man. So she eats the letter. And so when the British got her and searched her, they couldn't find anything, they had to let her go. And because she had memorized the letter, she was able to continue on and pass that message. So women were part of all of this, which I think is pretty cool. And regardless of their motivations for being here, they participated and their voice should be recognized and remembered just as much as the guys. So as Abigail Adams said, remember the ladies next time you guys think of them.